Hi, folks. This is Colonel Gene again. And today we're going to look at some fascinating aspects of this question, are we alone? We're going to examine some actual claims of alien contact, as well as incidents that prominent people among the world leaders claim to have experienced. Our first discussion will be about Jimmy Carter. During a campaign stop in Leary, Georgia in October 1969, Jimmy Carter and about 20 people who were with him saw a UFO in the sky. In September 1973, Jimmy filed a certified report with the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena about what he saw. He reported a round craft above the horizon that appeared to change color. He claimed there was no sound coming from the craft, and that after about 15 minutes, it departed at an astounding rate of speed. During the presidential campaign, he was asked about this report and about UFO sightings, and he pledged that if elected president, he would make public any and all information the federal government had about UFOs. After he was elected, the press questioned him about his commitment. He paused and answered, "There are some things that I cannot release because of national security." Another incident involves Barry Goldwater and General Curtis LeMay. Senator Goldwater became very interested in Roswell and the whole idea of UFOs and possible extraterrestrials visiting Earth. In 1966, there were lots of stories that alien material was being stored in a secure area of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Senator Goldwater was very close friends with Air Force General Curtis LeMay and decided to ask him about the alien material that was supposedly stored at Wright-Patterson. Despite their long friendship, General LeMay told him to never talk to him again about what might be stored at Wright-Patterson. Why would General LeMay have said to his long-term friend, what is so sensitive about this material being stored there that he would have caused him to act that way with Barry Goldwater? It begs the question, what was stored at Wright-Patterson, and what did General LeMay know about what might be there? Now we turn another page and look at Neil Armstrong. On the first walk on the moon in July 20th, 1969, there was a 2-minute break in the normal communications between the landing party on the moon and Houston. It turned out, apparently Neil Armstrong switched from the normal frequency that was being monitored and heard by the public to an alternate frequency that was normally used to simply monitor the health conditions of the astronauts. This frequency was not being broadcast to the public, but a ham operator was monitoring this frequency and heard Neil Armstrong tell Houston that he saw alien beings and a spacecraft along a rim of a large crater nearby. Reportedly, Armstrong said, quote, "They're on the edge of the crater and they're watching us," end quote. Although Armstrong never confirmed this conversation, he was a changed person when he returned from his moon landing. He was very sullen and did not speak of a lot of what may have taken place during that historic walk on the moon. Some people believe that Armstrong acted a bit like people that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. The stories persisted, but during his entire life, he did not admit having had that conversation or did not specifically say that he saw aliens on the moon observing our first mission to that extra-earthly body. The next incident that I want to discuss with you is one that is truly bizarre. On March the 16th, 1957, there were stories of a UFO landing in a farmer's field in Alexandria, Virginia, outside of Washington. The police arrived with their guns drawn, only to be greeted by a humanoid figure that was departing the spacecraft. He called himself Valiant Thor. Thor came out of the spacecraft and began communicating with the police telepathically. He asked them to be taken to see then President Eisenhower. The story is that Valiant Thor did in fact meet during the next several days with the president at the Pentagon. Thor claimed he was sent by a galactic council to look at what Earth was doing, especially with nuclear weapons and nuclear testing. He was sent to dissuade Earthlings from these tests and from the possible use of nuclear weapons. According to the stories that circulated, Eisenhower was supportive of creating a council against the use of weapons of mass destruction, but he was opposed by the CIA and powerful forces within DoD that prevented the formation of such a council. Thor then turned to an evangelist, Frank Stranges, to help end nuclear testing on Earth. Unfortunately, there is no independent confirmation that any such landing in Virginia or meeting with the president, except for the statements of Frank Strangers. Dr. Frank Strangers founded the National Investigations Committee on Unidentified Flying Objects, NICUFO. He wrote the book Stranger at the Pentagon, describing the visit of Valiant Thor. Dr. Strangers was a credible individual who began looking into the mysteries of the universe in the early 1940s. There was a great deal of controversy about his book, but he insisted that these conversations between Valiant Thor and officials within the Pentagon, including President Eisenhower, took place, and that they were very strongly opposed to Americans and Earthlings conducting nuclear tests. Another individual that was most interesting was a George Adamski. He was a well-known publisher and a Polish-American author that became known in ufology circles for pictures that he took of UFOs. He began in October 1946 and 47, and in 1949, he connected his camera to a 6-inch telescope. His pictures showed various UFO ships and were the subject of much controversy, including Project Blue Book. His pictures taken through his telescope of a spaceship at 9:10 a.m., December the 13th, 1952, were examined by numerous experts to determine if they were real or fake. 14 experts from J. Arthur Rank Film Distributor Company examined his 1952 photographs. They concluded that the images were absolutely real and that they were either of an alien spaceship or of a very accurate scale model. Joseph Mansour, head of Jetex Model Aircraft Company and an expert photographer, determined the pictures were not a model. William Sherwood, an optical scientist at Eastman Kodak, examined films of spaceships taken in 1965 by Mr. Adamski and concluded his pictures were true and not a model. The most extensive examination of his photos took place, and in all cases, the experts of the time believed that those pictures were real and that they were, in fact, images of extraterrestrial spacecraft visiting Earth. This was at a time when we didn't have digital photography and the ability to dub things in the way we do today. And the conclusion was that George Adamski's photos were the real thing. I had decided to leave the very best for last in this episode, and it turns out that Prince Philip had a 50-year fascination with UFOs, but had to quiet due to the stigma surrounding even the mention of UFOs. The prince decided to appoint Sir Peter Horsley to investigate and report back to him what he had learned about UFOs and possible extraterrestrials. Up until the prince's death in 2021, very little was known about the prince's interest in UFOs, which really turned on fascination. Sir Peter Horsley started his career in 1939 when he joined the Royal Air Force. He began as a gunner and later a pilot in the RAF. After World War II, he was appointed adjutant to the Oxford University Air Squadron, and in 1952, he became a wing commander. In 1956, he became the full-time equerrier to Prince Philip, where he investigated UFO sightings and stories about extraterrestrials. Sir Horsley spent 7 years in the service of the prince and reported back to him on a regular basis what he had learned. He was a decorated war hero and a long-term associate of the British royal family. Sir Horsley wrote his autobiography entitled Sounds from Another Room, which was published in 1997. In his book, he described his fascinating encounter in 1954 with an alien named Mr. Janus. The meeting took place in the apartment of a Mrs. Markham on South Street in a fashionable section of London. During this encounter, Mr. Janus explained that he was from another world and demonstrated his ability by communicating with Sir Horsley in a telepathic manner. He was able to demonstrate that he knew what Horsley was thinking before Horsley expressed his thoughts verbally. Mr. Janus told him that he would like to see Prince Philip. Mr. Janus provided Horsley with an array of detailed information about Great Britain's most closely guarded secrets, including its nuclear weapons and nuclear power. Sir Horsley was totally convinced that Mr. Janus was not of planet Earth. For him to be able to communicate telepathically the way he did and to have knowledge of the detailed secrets of the British Empire was impossible for any normal Earthling. Mr. Janus told Sir Hensley that humanity would eventually explore the universe at speeds of light and beyond. They would develop robots and computer-controlled spaceships. They would develop anti-gravity craft. He talked about the spirit of man and of God as the universal designer. He talked about the golden age of humanity, providing humanity survived, and the unimaginable development of the mind. He talked of life in the universe that is much more advanced than Earthlings. Some had developed to the point where they could dispense with their physical bodies and rely on simply their spirit. Janus spoke of the Creator and the importance of prayer and collective willpower. Mr. Janus claimed the number of visitors that came to Earth is a small fraction of those that actually exist in the greater universe. They came here to learn about the primitive and hostile race on Earth. He said many of the spacecraft were remotely operated, but that some of the vehicles were occupied by extraterrestrials. He said they had not made themselves known to Earthlings because they didn't believe they were ready to accept direct contact by non-humans. Sir Peter wrote down the discussion he had with Mr. Janus immediately after that meeting in London to ensure that it was accurately recorded. After this meeting, he notified his superiors and found that Mrs. Markham and General Martin, who introduced Sir Peter to Mrs. Markham, disappeared, and he never had contact with them again. All of his experiences were recorded in his autobiography, Sounds of Another Room. Today, we have looked at experiences, observations of some very prominent people in our world. People like the President, like Prince Philip, like our astronauts, and it simply adds to the body of information and knowledge that points to the fact that we really are not alone in this universe, and that in fact, we are not only an infinitesimal part of the greater universe, but our point of evolution and development is far inferior to others in our universe. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I did researching it. It certainly opens up a vista of thought, and I hope that you will take the opportunity to do some research on your own to come up with even a more important and interesting incidents. I invite you to tell your friends about our podcast and encourage people that may have had direct sightings or contact with extraterrestrials to contact my publicist, Deborah Wallace, so you can be interviewed on my podcast. Until the next time, stay well and keep looking.